The airspace above the Nevada desert shimmered with heat as the afternoon sun beat down on McCarran International Airport. Elena Vasquez gripped her worn leather carry-on, standing in line like thousands of other travelers. Just another face in the crowd. Just another body to be processed, seated, and transported. Her employee badge identified her only as Air Traffic Controller #203 a designation that had defined her existence for the past 4 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The chatter of excited tourists heading to the Las Vegas Strip washed over Elena as she moved through security with practiced efficiency. No liquids over 3 ounces. Laptop in a separate bin. Shoes off. A routine she had performed countless times, yet today felt different. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she collected her belongings, knowing that this flight wasn't just another work commute. 4 years ago, Elena had been the most promising air traffic controller at Andrews Air Force Base. Her ability to visualize 3-dimensional airspace and predict flight patterns had been described as supernatural by her instructors. She could track a dozen aircraft simultaneously without breaking a sweat, keeping military and civilian planes separated with mathematical precision. Until the incident that had shattered her career and sent her into self-imposed exile at a commercial airport in the middle of nowhere. "Next passenger," called the gate agent, barely glancing up as Elena handed over her boarding pass. The digital scanner beeped confirmation, and Elena made her way down the jetway, her mind drifting back to the night that had changed everything. The night when a communication error had nearly resulted in 2 fighter jets colliding during a night training exercise. No one had died. No equipment had been lost. But in the high-stakes world of military aviation, near misses were treated as failures. Someone had to take the blame, and Elena had stepped forward, accepting responsibility, even though the error hadn't been hers. She found her seat, 14A window, and stowed her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her. As other passengers struggled with the overhead bins and negotiated seat assignments, Elena stared out at the tarmac, watching ground crews prepare the aircraft for departure. She knew every step of the process intimately, could recite the pre-flight checklist from memory, understood the complex dance of machines and humans that made flight possible. The cabin filled quickly, the middle seat beside her occupied by a businessman already tapping away at his laptop, oblivious to her presence. Elena preferred it that way. Invisibility had become her comfort zone, a shield against the judgment and disappointment she had faced at Andrews. Here, on this commercial flight heading to Washington, D.C., she was just Traveler 203, an anonymous face in a sea of transient humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 1732 to Washington Dulles International Airport, announced the flight attendant, her voice carrying the practiced cheerfulness of someone who had delivered the same message thousands of times. Our flight time today will be approximately 4 hours and 35 minutes. We ask that you please give your attention to the safety demonstration that will begin shortly. Elena closed her eyes, letting the familiar litany wash over her. Oxygen masks. Exit rows. Seat belts. The rituals of commercial aviation, designed to create an illusion of control in an environment where humans hurled themselves through the sky in metal tubes. She knew better than most how many systems had to function perfectly for a flight to proceed without incident. How many human decisions were made every second to keep aircraft safely separated in increasingly crowded skies. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Elena felt the subtle shift in her stomach, the faint sensation of movement that signaled the beginning of their journey. The engines spooled up, their pitch rising as they generated the thrust needed to propel nearly 100 tons of aircraft, passengers, and cargo into the air. Physics made manifest, the triumph of engineering over gravity's persistent pull. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff," came the captain's voice over the intercom, and Elena felt the aircraft accelerate down the runway, pressing her back into her seat. The moment of liftoff always gave her a peculiar thrill, the brief transition from earthbound to airborne, when the aircraft seemed to hesitate before committing to flight. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, Elena allowed herself to relax slightly. The hardest part of her journey still lay ahead. After 4 years of hiding in plain sight, directing commercial traffic at a regional airport in Nevada, She was returning to Andrews for a ceremony honoring her former mentor, Colonel James Harrison, who was retiring after 30 years of service. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly, a formal card with military insignia that had sat on her kitchen counter for weeks while she debated whether to attend. Colonel Harrison had been the only one who had stood by her after the incident, the only one who had questioned the official narrative that placed the blame squarely on Elena's shoulders. He had fought for her, argued that the evidence didn't support the findings, insisted that she was being scapegoated to protect someone higher up the chain of command. His advocacy had cost him a promotion and nearly ended his own career. Elena owed him her presence at his retirement, even if it meant facing the ghosts of her past. The flight leveled off at cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin crew began beverage service. Elena declined with a polite shake of her head, preferring to remain undisturbed with her thoughts. Through the window, she watched the landscape below transform from desert to mountains to plains, the patchwork of American geography unfolding beneath her like a living map. 4 hours later, the aircraft began its descent into Dulles. Elena felt the familiar pressure changes in her ears as they dropped through 30,000 feet, then 20, then 10. The flaps extended, increasing drag and lift simultaneously, slowing the aircraft while maintaining altitude. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk that vibrated through the cabin floor. All normal procedures, executed with the precision that made commercial aviation the safest form of transportation in human history. They touched down with barely a bump, the reverse thrusters roaring as they slowed the aircraft from 150 knots to taxi speed in a matter of seconds. Elena remained seated as other passengers stood immediately, eager to retrieve bags and disembark despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. Patience had been drilled into her during her military training, the understanding that procedures existed for reasons that transcended individual convenience. When she finally exited the aircraft, Elena moved through the terminal with purposeful steps, bypassing the baggage claim since she had packed everything she needed in her carry-on. Outside, she hailed a taxi, giving the driver an address in Alexandria rather than Andrews. She wasn't ready to return to the base yet. First, she needed to prepare herself, to don the emotional armor required to face her former colleagues. The taxi wound through the evening traffic of the D.C. suburbs, eventually pulling up before a modest hotel where Elena had reserved a room for 3 nights. After checking in, she stood at the window of her 7th-floor room, gazing out at the lights of the capital city in the distance. Tomorrow, she would attend the ceremony. Tomorrow, she would face the judgment and whispers that had driven her away 4 years ago. Her phone chimed with a message. "Colonel Harrison, glad you're coming, Elena. It means more than you know. There are people who need to see you." Elena stared at the cryptic message, wondering what the colonel meant. What people? And why did they need to see her? She had assumed her return would be met with awkward silences and averted gazes, not anticipation. Setting the phone aside, she prepared for bed, knowing that sleep would be elusive despite her exhaustion. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed at odds with Elena's internal turmoil. She dressed carefully in a charcoal suit that was professional without being overtly military, applying minimal makeup that highlighted her amber eyes and olive complexion without drawing undue attention. Her dark hair, once kept in a regulation bun, now fell to her shoulders in soft waves, a small but significant departure from her former self. The taxi ride to Andrews seemed simultaneously too long and too brief. Each mile brought her closer to a confrontation she had avoided for 4 years, yet she wished for more time to steel herself against whatever reception awaited her. The security checkpoint at the base entrance was her first hurdle. The young airman examined her ID and the invitation, then made a call. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she waited, wondering if there had been some mistake, if her name had been removed from the approved list. "Ma'am," the airman said finally, handing back her documents, "you're cleared to proceed. Building 4872, the Officers Club. Do you need directions?" "No," Elena replied softly. "I remember." The taxi continued onto the base, and Elena watched familiar landmarks slide past the window. The flight line where F-22s and F-35s stood in neat rows. The control tower, where she had spent countless hours coordinating complex military operations. The administrative buildings where her career had been dissected and dismissed by officers who had never sat behind a radar screen. At the officers' club, Elena paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, gathering her courage. The building hadn't changed. The same imposing brick structure with flags flying proudly from poles flanking the entrance. Inside, a reception area had been set up for the ceremony, with uniformed personnel and civilians mingling, drinks in hand, conversations flowing. Elena hesitated at the threshold, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a world that had once been hers. "Vasquez!" The booming voice cut through the ambient noise, and Elena turned to see Colonel Harrison striding toward her, resplendent in his dress uniform adorned with rows of ribbons and medals. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, his silver hair cropped close to his scalp, his posture unyielding despite decades of service. "Colonel," Elena responded, accepting his firm handshake, surprised when he pulled her into a brief, formal embrace. "None of that, Colonel. Business today," he said, smiling broadly. "James will do fine. I'm retired as of—" He checked his watch with theatrical precision. 2 hours and 17 minutes ago." Elena managed to smile, relief washing over her at his warm reception. "Congratulations on your retirement, James." "Come," he said, placing a hand lightly on her elbow, guiding her deeper into the reception. "There are people you should meet." As they moved through the crowd, Elena felt the weight of stares, heard the subtle hush that followed her progress across the room. Some faces she recognized. Former colleagues who now looked away or offered stiff nods of acknowledgement. Others were unfamiliar, young officers who would have arrived after her departure, but who clearly knew who she was, their curious gazes following her movement. Harrison led her to a small group standing near a window, overlooking the runway. 3 men in the distinctive flight suits of F-117 Nighthawk pilots, the Air Force's stealth fighters, turned as they approached. Elena felt a jolt of recognition, though she was certain she had never met these men before. "Captain Vasquez," Harrison said formally. "May I introduce Lieutenant Colonel Michael Reeves, Major Thomas Chen, and Captain David Washington. Gentlemen, this is Elena Vasquez." The oldest of the 3, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Captain Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying the distinctive drawl of someone raised in the Deep South. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Elena shook his offered hand automatically, confusion evident on her face. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant Colonel, but I don't believe we've met before." A smile cracked his weathered features. "No, ma'am, we haven't. But we've heard your voice. Many times." Before Elena could process this cryptic statement, Major Chen joined the conversation. "Operation Midnight Falcon, 3 years ago. You were on comms, weren't you?" "Not officially, but it was you." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Operation Midnight Falcon had been a classified training exercise conducted over the Nevada desert, nowhere near her commercial airport. Yet she had indeed been on comms that night, filling in for a colleague at Nellis Air Force Base who had fallen ill suddenly. She had used a different name, careful to disguise her identity, while guiding the stealth aircraft through complex maneuvers in crowded airspace. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said carefully, aware that Harrison was watching her reaction closely. Captain Washington, the youngest of the 3, laughed softly. "With all due respect, Captain Vasquez, your voice is unmistakable. The way you give directions, the clarity of your instructions, the ability to anticipate our needs before we even articulate them. There's no one else like you in air traffic control." Elena looked to Harrison, who nodded slowly. "They figured it out, Elena. Not just them, but others too. Your distinctive approach to ATC hasn't gone unnoticed, even when you tried to hide behind different names." "Operation Jade Horizon," Lieutenant Colonel Reeves continued. "Last year, when we lost communications during that electrical storm and you talked us through landing using only visual cues, do you remember what you said to me?" Elena swallowed hard. She remembered perfectly. "I said, Stealth 7, the runway doesn't care about your fancy tech. Visualize your glide path at 7 degrees. Count to 4, then ease back 2% on your throttle. Trust yourself, not your instruments." Reeves nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And I did exactly that. Brought a $100 million aircraft down safely in conditions that should have been impossible. Because you understood not just the physics of flight, but the psychology of pilots in crisis. And then there was the wing tilt, added Major Chen, his eyes bright with admiration. The first time I heard your voice on comms during a night operation, I was so shocked I tilted my wings in the traditional pilot salute. You never acknowledged it officially. You couldn't, but the next time I heard you, I did it again. And every stealth pilot who recognized your voice started doing the same. It became our way of saying, we know who you are, and we respect you. Elena felt a complicated mix of emotions. Fear at having been discovered, pride that her work had been recognized, confusion about why these pilots were telling her this now. I could lose my job, she said quietly. What I did, filling in at military installations. It wasn't authorized. Harrison cleared his throat. That's partly why I asked you here today, Elena. It's time to stop hiding. These gentlemen aren't the only ones who've recognized your exceptional abilities. The incidents they're describing have been documented, analyzed, and brought to the attention of people much higher up the chain of command than any of us. What people? Elena asked, echoing the question she had asked herself upon receiving Harrison's cryptic text message. As if on cue, a tall woman in civilian clothes approached their group. Despite the lack of uniform, everything about her bearing screamed military. The precise movements, the evaluating gaze, the economy of expression. Captain Vasquez, she said, extending her hand. General Patricia Winters, Director of Air Combat Command. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Elena stared at General Patricia Winters, her mind struggling to process the sudden appearance of Air Combat Command's director at what was supposed to be a simple retirement ceremony. The handshake felt like a formality that existed in another dimension as questions raced through Elena's mind. How much did they know? How long had they been watching her? What consequences awaited her unauthorized assistance to military pilots? Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, General Winters suggested, gesturing toward a door that led to a smaller conference room adjacent to the main reception area. Colonel Harrison, if you would join us as well. Elena followed them in a daze, aware of the curious glances that tracked their movement across the room. The stealth pilots remained behind, but their knowing looks followed her like physical weight on her shoulders. Inside the conference room, General Winters closed the door and motioned for Elena to take a seat at the polished wooden table. Captain Vasquez, the general began, settling into a chair across from her. Or should I say Air Traffic Controller number 203, you've created quite the mystery for us to unravel over the past 4 years. Ma'am, I can explain, Elena started, but Winters raised a hand to stop her. I'm not here to reprimand you, Captain, quite the opposite. She placed a thick folder on the table between them. This contains reports of 27 incidents where your unofficial assistance prevented potential disasters or significantly improved mission outcomes. 27 documented cases where pilots specifically noted the exceptional quality of air traffic control they received during critical operations. Quote, Colonel Harrison leaned forward. Elena, after you left Andrews, something changed in our ATC effectiveness. Mission completion rates dropped by 17%. Communication errors increased. Pilots reported feeling less confident during complex maneuvers. We didn't understand why until reports started coming in from Nellis, Edwards, and other bases about a mysterious controller who seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to anticipate aircraft needs. I wasn't trying to interfere, Elena said quietly. I just couldn't stop being who I am. When I heard those pilots in trouble, I had to help. General Winters nodded. That's precisely why I'm here. 4 years ago, you were made the scapegoat for an incident that wasn't your fault. The investigation was flawed, the conclusions predetermined. Politics, not facts, drove the decision to remove you from your position. Elena felt a surge of emotion, vindication mixed with renewed anger at the injustice she had suffered. You know about that. I ordered a complete review of the case 6 months ago, after the pattern of your interventions became clear. The evidence is unambiguous. The communication failure that night was caused by equipment malfunction, not human error. You were blamed to protect a procurement contract worth billions of dollars. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. For 4 years, she had carried the weight of that night, questioning her abilities, doubting her judgment. To hear that it had all been a deliberate cover-up to protect financial interests felt both validating and devastating. "Why tell me this now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Harrison exchanged a glance with General Winters before answering. "Because we need you back, Elena. Not just at Andrews, but in a completely new capacity. The skills you've demonstrated, your ability to visualize complex airspace, to communicate effectively under pressure, to understand both the technical and psychological aspects of aviation. They're too valuable to waste on routine commercial traffic." General Winters opened the folder and pushed a document across the table. "We're establishing a new program, Advanced Aerospace Traffic Integration and Navigation, Operation AATIN. It's designed to develop next-generation air traffic control protocols for the most sophisticated aircraft in our inventory, particularly stealth platforms that operate in contested or complex airspace." Elena scanned the document, her professional interest piqued despite her reservations. The program described an entirely new approach to military ATC, one that emphasized human judgment and intuitive understanding over rigid procedural compliance. "You want me to join this program?" she asked, looking up from the paper. "We want you to lead it," General Winters corrected. "Your unofficial work has already proven the concept. Now we want to formalize it, expand it, and train others to approach ATC the way you do." The offer was tempting. A chance to return to meaningful work, to transform her approach to air traffic control from a personal technique into a standardized methodology that could benefit countless pilots and missions. Yet Elena hesitated, the wounds of her past experience still raw despite the years that had passed. "What about the people who forced me out? The ones who covered up the equipment failure and made me take the blame?" "Some have retired," Harrison said. "Others have been reassigned. The procurement officer who pushed hardest for your removal is currently facing court-martial for unrelated contracting improprieties." "And the official record?" Elena pressed. "Will it be corrected?" General Winters nodded firmly. "Already in process. Your military record will be amended to reflect the truth. You'll receive back pay for the 4 years of service you missed, and formal recognition for the assistance you provided from your civilian position." Elena sat back, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. For years she had existed in a kind of limbo, neither fully civilian nor military, performing a job far beneath her capabilities while secretly maintaining her connection to the world she loved. Now, without warning, she was being offered not just reinstatement, but promotion, not just exoneration, but leadership. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course," General Winters agreed, standing. "The official offer will be delivered to your hotel tomorrow. Take the weekend to consider it. We'll need your answer by Monday." As they prepared to return to the reception, Colonel Harrison placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "For what it's worth, I always knew you'd be back. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever." The remainder of the retirement ceremony passed in a blur for Elena. She accepted congratulations from officers who had once avoided eye contact, engaged in small talk with pilots who seemed eager to share stories of missions where her voice had guided them through difficulty, and watched as Colonel Harrison received his final military honors. Through it all, her mind kept returning to the offer that lay before her, weighing the opportunity against the risk of trusting a system that had betrayed her once before. Later that evening, as Elena sat alone in her hotel room, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Major Chen standing in the hallway, now dressed in civilian clothes rather than his flight suit. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Colonel Harrison gave me your hotel information. I thought you might have questions that would be better answered by someone who's experienced your work firsthand, rather than by generals and program directors." Elena hesitated, then stepped back to allow him entry. "Actually, I do have questions. About the wing tilt you mentioned earlier. When did that start?" Major Chen smiled as he took a seat in the room's single armchair. "About 3 years ago. It was during a night training mission over the Nevada desert. Weather was deteriorating, visibility dropping to almost zero. My instruments were giving conflicting readings because of atmospheric interference. Then this voice came on the comms. Your voice, with directions so precise and confidence, inspiring that I had absolute faith in them despite never having heard you before. I remember that night, Elena said softly. It was my third time filling in at Nellis. The regular controller got overwhelmed with the number of aircraft and weather conditions. You talked me through that storm like you were sitting in the cockpit with me. When I landed safely, I wanted to thank you properly, but by then, another controller was on comms. The next time I heard your voice, months later during another exercise, I tilted my wings. Just a slight bank left then right. It's an old pilot's salute, a sign of respect. I didn't think you'd notice. But I did notice, Elena admitted. I thought it was just a routine maneuver. Then it happened again with another pilot. And another. Eventually we figured out we were all doing it whenever we heard your voice. It became our way of acknowledging you without compromising your unofficial status. Elena felt a surge of emotion at the realization that, far from being forgotten, her work had been recognized and honored by the very pilots she had guided. Why didn't anyone report me? What I was doing wasn't authorized. I could have been arrested for interfering with military communications. Major Chen leaned forward, his expression serious. Because you saved lives, Captain Vasquez. Not just aircraft and equipment, but actual human lives. Pilots trust their controllers with their lives every time they fly. When we found one who was exceptional, who could see patterns others missed, who could communicate with absolute clarity in crisis situations, we weren't about to lose that resource over bureaucratic technicalities. But now they want to formalize it, Elena mused. Turn whatever I do instinctively into a program, a methodology. They want to understand it, Chen corrected. To learn from it, yes, but not necessarily to standardize it in a way that loses what makes it special. That's why they want you to lead the program, not just participate in it. As Major Chen left, Elena found herself standing at the window again, gazing out at the lights of Washington, D.C. The city looked different now, less threatening, more familiar. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to stop running from her past and start building a future that embraced her unique abilities rather than hiding them. The next morning, a formal letter arrived at her hotel, containing the official offer to lead Operation AATIN. The salary was generous, the responsibilities extensive, the potential impact significant. Elena read through the document 3 times, noting the careful language that acknowledged both her official service record and her unofficial contributions during her civilian years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was still considering the offer when her phone rang, a Nevada number she didn't recognize. Hello? She answered cautiously. Captain Vasquez, this is Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell. I'm a pilot with the 433rd Fighter Squadron at Nellis. Elena tensed. How did you get this number, Lieutenant? Through Major Chen, ma'am. I hope it's okay that I called. I needed to thank you personally. Thank me for what? 3 months ago, I was flying a night mission in an F-35 when my navigation systems failed completely. I was flying blind at 30,000 feet with deteriorating weather conditions. The regular controller was following protocol, instructing me to eject. Then suddenly you were on comms, talking me through a visual landing using star positions and terrain features as references. You kept me calm, kept me focused, guided me down when every instrument I had was dead. Elena remembered the incident vividly. The young pilot's voice tight with controlled panic, the difficult decision to take over comms against regulations, the tense minutes of guiding him, using only her visualization of his position and the landscape below. Anyone would have done the same, she said quietly. No, ma'am, they wouldn't. Most controllers would have followed protocol, which called for ejection. You trusted your judgment over procedure, and you trusted my ability to execute your instructions. You saved not just my life, but a $100 million aircraft. And you disappeared before I could thank you. I couldn't exactly stick around for congratulations, Lieutenant. What I did wasn't authorized. I know that, ma'am. I also know they're offering you a position to lead a new program. Major Chen told me about it. I just wanted you to know that whatever you decide, there are dozens of pilots out there who owe you their lives and their aircraft. We've been tilting wings for you for years. Now we're hoping you'll come back officially so we can thank you properly." After the call ended, Elena sat for a long time with the offer letter in her hands. The decision before her wasn't just about a job or a title. It was about embracing her identity after years of hiding, about using her gifts openly instead of in shadows, about trusting a system that had once betrayed her to now support her in creating something new. By Sunday evening, her decision was made. Monday morning found her back at Andrews, this time passing through security with her old military ID, reactivated and updated with her new rank and position. The familiar sights and sounds of the base no longer triggered anxiety, but a sense of homecoming she hadn't anticipated. General Winters was waiting in a conference room that had been converted into temporary offices for Operation AATIN. Maps covered the walls, showing airspace configurations and flight patterns. Computers displayed simulation models of complex air traffic scenarios. A team of controllers and pilots stood as Elena entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright admiration. "Captain Vasquez," General Winters greeted her. "Or should I say Major Vasquez now? Your promotion has been processed effective immediately." Elena accepted the new insignia with a mixture of pride and humility. "Thank you, General. I'm ready to get started." "Excellent. Your first task is to explain to this team what they couldn't figure out in 4 years of analyzing your interventions. How exactly you visualize airspace and aircraft interactions in ways that transcend standard ATC approaches." Elena looked at the assembled group, experienced controllers and pilots who had been selected for their exceptional skills and open-minded approach to innovation. For a moment she felt a flutter of doubt. Could she really articulate the intuitive process that had become second nature to her? Could her personal technique be taught or replicated? Then she remembered the wing tilts, the silent acknowledgement from pilots who had recognized her unique contribution even when she couldn't acknowledge theirs. They had believed in her abilities before she had fully believed in herself again. "It starts with three-dimensional thinking," she began, moving to the largest map on the wall. "Most controllers visualize airspace as a series of layers or zones. I see it as a fluid medium where aircraft move not just through physical space but through time and possibility spaces simultaneously." As she spoke, Elena felt the familiar rush of engagement that came with meaningful work. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding her knowledge or tempering her insights. She was sharing them openly, watching as understanding dawned on the faces around her, seeing the nods of recognition from pilots who had experienced her approach firsthand. By midday, they had already begun developing new training modules based on Elena's visualization techniques. By week's end, they had created simulation scenarios that challenged conventional ATC wisdom while demonstrating the effectiveness of her more intuitive approach. Within a month, the first test flights were scheduled to validate their methodologies in real-world conditions. The day of the initial test arrived with clear skies and optimal visibility, conditions specifically chosen to establish baseline performance before progressing to more challenging scenarios. Elena stood in the control tower, surrounded by recording equipment and observation teams, acutely aware that this moment would either validate or undermine the entire premise of Operation AATIN. "Stealth 7, this is AATIN Control," she said into her headset, her voice calm and confident. "You are cleared for the complex interaction pattern as briefed. We'll be tracking your progress through the entire sequence." "ATIN Control, Stealth 7, came the response, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, who had specifically requested to fly the first test mission. "Understood and initiating sequence now." What followed was a ballet of aircraft movements through congested airspace, deliberately designed to create decision points and potential conflicts that would require both pilot and controller to adapt and communicate with precision. Elena guided not just Reeves but 5 other aircraft through intersecting flight paths and altitude changes, maintaining separation with margins that were smaller than standard but still absolutely safe. "ATIN Control, Stealth 7. Reeves's voice came through as he completed the final maneuver. "Sequence complete. Performance metrics show 15% fuel savings and 23% reduction in completion time compared to standard routing." A cheer went up from the observation team. The numbers exceeded even their most optimistic projections, providing quantifiable evidence that Elena's approach delivered measurable benefits beyond just subjective improvements in pilot confidence. As Reeves's aircraft turned for its final approach, Elena watched through the tower windows as the distinctive shape of the F-117 became visible against the blue sky. Just before touchdown, the aircraft banked slightly left, then right, the now familiar wing tilt that had become the signature acknowledgement between Elena and her pilots. This time, however, it wasn't performed in secrecy or as part of an underground recognition system. It was an official salute, recorded in flight logs and observation notes, the first formal instance of what would soon become a tradition within Operation AATIN. The Vasquez Acknowledgement, a physical expression of the trust between pilots and the controllers who guided them through the invisible highways of the sky. As Reeves taxied to a stop and the observation team began analyzing the mountains of data collected during the test, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The journey from disgraced scapegoat to program director had been long and painful, but standing here now, watching her methodology transform from personal technique to official doctrine, she knew it had been worth every difficult step. Major Vasquez, General Winters said, approaching with data tablets displaying the preliminary results. I think it's safe to say Operation AATIN is officially a success. Congratulations. Elena accepted the congratulations with a nod, but her attention was already turning to the next phase, the next challenge. She had spent 4 years hiding her light, existing as just another traveler, another anonymous controller processing routine flights. Now she was back where she belonged, not just reclaiming her past position, but creating something entirely new. A future where her unique gifts could benefit not just individual pilots, but transform the entire approach to military air traffic control. From Traveler 203 to Major Vasquez, from anonymity to leadership, from exile to homecoming, the journey had come full circle. And as 6 more stealth fighters approached the runway, each executing the now famous wing tilt as they prepared to land, Elena knew that the true journey was just beginning. 6 months after the successful launch of Operation AATIN, Elena found herself standing before the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon, preparing to brief them on the program's remarkable progress. The journey from disgraced air traffic controller to presenting before the highest military leadership in the country still seemed surreal at times. A transformation as dramatic as the one she had implemented in military aviation protocols. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Major Vasquez, began General Marshall, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, your Operation AATIN has generated quite the buzz throughout our forces. I understand you've reduced incident rates by 43%, while simultaneously increasing operational efficiency by over 30%. Those are numbers that get our attention. Elena nodded, her confidence no longer the forced facade she had maintained during her years in exile, but a genuine embodiment of her expertise and vision. Yes, sir. By implementing what we call intuitive spatial recognition protocols, we've fundamentally changed how controllers and pilots communicate during complex operations. Rather than treating air traffic control as a series of mechanical instructions, we've developed it into a collaborative dialogue between equals with complementary perspectives. The presentation screens behind her displayed data visualizations showing the dramatic improvement in mission success rates, the reduction in near-miss incidents, and the quantifiable improvements in pilot confidence during challenging operations. Numbers told part of the story, but Elena knew that the true revolution was happening in the minds of controllers and pilots who were learning to communicate in an entirely new language of spatial awareness and collaborative problem-solving. What about implementation costs? Asked Admiral Rodriguez, the Navy's representative. New programs always look promising in controlled tests, but widespread adoption across all branches would require significant resources. That's where we've been most surprised, Admiral, Elena replied, advancing to the next slide. Because our approach focuses on human cognition and communication rather than new equipment, implementation costs are primarily in training, not hardware. We've actually reduced equipment needs by teaching controllers to rely more on their spatial intelligence and less on redundant systems. As the briefing continued, Elena felt a deep sense of validation that transcended mere professional recognition. Every question she answered, every data point she presented, represented not just the success of Operation AATIN, but the vindication of her approach to air traffic control, an approach that had once made her an outcast but now made her a pioneer. After the presentation, as the Joint Chiefs voted unanimously to expand AATIN across all military branches, General Winters approached Elena with rare display of emotion. "You've done something remarkable here, Major. You've changed not just protocols but mindsets. That's the hardest kind of change to achieve in military organizations." "Thank you, General," Elena replied, gathering her presentation materials. "But this is just the beginning. The improvements we've seen so far have been primarily in controlled training environments. The real test will come with combat operations and multinational exercises." "Which brings me to my next point," Winters said, lowering her voice slightly. "NATO has expressed interest in adopting AATIN protocols for their upcoming Arctic Shield exercise. They want you to personally oversee implementation and training for controllers from 6 different nations." Elena felt a momentary flutter of apprehension. International implementation would bring new challenges: language barriers, different training backgrounds, varying levels of equipment sophistication. Yet it also represented an opportunity to prove that her approach transcended not just individual preferences but cultural and national differences as well. "When do they need me?" she asked, already mentally calculating the preparations required. 3 weeks. The exercise will be conducted from a Norwegian airbase above the Arctic Circle. You'll need to prepare your team for extreme conditions, both environmental and operational. As Elena left the Pentagon that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across the grounds, a visual metaphor for the influence her work was beginning to have across the global aviation community. From the darkness of professional exile to the bright spotlight of international recognition, her journey had been defined not by the judgment of others, but by her unwavering belief in her own abilities and approach. The 3 weeks of preparation passed in a blur of activity, selecting team members, developing training modules adapted for multinational forces, learning the specific challenges of Arctic aviation operations. Elena worked 18-hour days, driven by a sense of purpose that had been absent during her years of hiding in plain sight as Traveler 203. The morning of departure arrived with a crispness that matched the Arctic destination awaiting them. Elena stood on the tarmac at Andrews, watching as her team of 15 specialists boarded the C-17 transport aircraft that would carry them to Norway. Each member had been personally selected not just for their technical abilities, but for their adaptability and open-mindedness, essential qualities for the cultural bridge building that lay ahead. "Major Vasquez," called a familiar voice, and Elena turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Reeves approaching in his flight suit. "Permission to join the mission, ma'am." "Michael," she said, dropping formal address in surprise. "I thought you were assigned to the Red Flag exercises in Nevada this month." "I requested reassignment when I heard about Arctic Shield. Figured you might need a pilot who already speaks your language to help translate for the others." His smile carried the easy confidence of someone who had flown through storms, both meteorological and bureaucratic. "Besides, I wouldn't miss the chance to see the Europeans' faces when they realize what they've been doing wrong all these years." Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the tarmac. "Always the diplomat, aren't you? But yes, having you there would be invaluable." "Permission granted, Colonel, though I hope you packed warm clothes. Norway in February isn't exactly Nevada." The flight to Norway gave Elena time to review the dossiers of the NATO controllers and pilots who would be participating in the exercise. Experienced professionals from Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the host nation Norway, each with impressive credentials but also deeply ingrained in traditional ATC methodologies. Changing their approach wouldn't be a matter of simply teaching new techniques, but of reshaping fundamental assumptions about controller-pilot relationships. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bodo Air Station greeted them with howling winds and temperatures well below freezing, the Arctic landscape both beautiful and forbidding in its stark white simplicity. After a brief welcoming ceremony conducted in the warmth of the base's administrative building, Elena and her team were shown to their quarters and given 24 hours to acclimate before training would begin. That evening, as Elena reviewed her presentation materials one final time, a knock at her door revealed Colonel Anders Larsen, the Norwegian officer commanding the Arctic Shield exercise. "Major Vasquez," he said, his English carrying only the slightest hint of a Scandinavian accent. "I hope the accommodations are satisfactory." "More than satisfactory, Colonel. Thank you for the hospitality." Larsen nodded, but his expression remained serious. "I wanted to speak with you privately before tomorrow's briefing. There are concerns among some of the NATO participants about implementing new protocols during such a complex exercise." "What kind of concerns?" Elena asked, though she could already anticipate the answer. "The usual resistance to change, I suspect. Questions about why established procedures that have worked adequately for decades need to be replaced. Doubts about whether American innovations will translate effectively to European operations." He paused. "And, if I may be blunt, some skepticism about your personal qualifications to lead such a dramatic shift in approach." Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she had experienced years ago when facing unwarranted criticism at Andrews. But now, backed by data and success, the feeling didn't paralyze her, it energized her. "I appreciate your candor, Colonel. Skepticism is natural and even healthy when considering major operational changes. I'd be more concerned if everyone simply accepted our approach without questions." She smiled slightly. "As for my qualifications, I find that results tend to speak more convincingly than credentials." "I agree," Larsen said, his expression warming. "Which is why I've arranged for a demonstration tomorrow rather than just a briefing. Sometimes seeing is more effective than hearing, yes." The demonstration the following day took place in Bodo's state-of-the-art simulation facility, where controllers and pilots could practice complex scenarios without risking actual aircraft. Elena had arrived early, working with the Norwegian technical staff to program a particularly challenging scenario involving multiple aircraft types, degraded communications, and rapidly changing weather conditions. When the NATO participants arrived, their expressions ranged from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. Particularly notable was Major Philippe Rousseau, the French Air Force's chief controller, whose crossed arms and narrowed eyes telegraphed his resistance before a single word was spoken. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena began, standing before the assembled group with calm authority. "Rather than tell you about Operation AATIN's approach, I'd like to show you. I have programmed a scenario that would typically result in approximately 60% of aircraft having to divert or abort mission under standard NATO protocols. With your permission, I'd like to run it twice, once using your current methods and once using ours." Major Rousseau stepped forward. "And who will operate the control station for these demonstrations?" "Surely not yourself, as that would hardly be an objective comparison." "An excellent point, Major," Elena conceded. "I propose that you operate the first run using standard protocols, and then one of your colleagues operates the second run after a brief orientation to our approach. That way, the comparison isn't between controllers, but between methodologies." The challenge had been issued, and professional pride ensured it would be accepted. Rousseau took his place at the control station, while the pilots, both real and simulated, prepared for the exercise. What followed was a masterclass in traditional air traffic control. Precise, by-the-book instructions, delivered with the confidence of decades of experience. Yet as the scenario progressed and complications mounted, the limitations of the standard approach became evident. Communication channels became congested with increasingly urgent instructions, aircraft were forced to hold or divert as safe pathways became limited, and the overall mission effectiveness steadily declined. When the simulation ended, 58% of aircraft had failed to complete their assigned missions, almost exactly matching Elena's prediction. The room was silent as the final statistics displayed on the main screen. "A difficult scenario," Rousseau acknowledged stiffly. "Perhaps unrealistically so." "Perhaps," Elena agreed, "but not outside the realm of possibility, especially in Arctic conditions where communications and visibility can degrade rapidly." She turned to the group. "Who would like to try the second run using our approach?" To everyone's surprise, it was Captain Isabella Ricci, a young Italian controller with only 5 years of experience who volunteered. "I would like to try if that's acceptable. I've been reading about American innovations in ATC and am curious to experience this firsthand." Elena spent 30 minutes with Richie, explaining not just the technical aspects of AATIN's approach, but the philosophical shift it represented, from controllers as traffic directors to controllers as collaborative problem solvers who shared spatial awareness with pilots. The key wasn't just giving better instructions, but creating a shared mental model of the airspace that both controller and pilot could navigate together. When the second simulation began, the difference was immediately apparent. Rather than issuing standard instructions based on fixed protocols, Richie began describing the airspace in three-dimensional terms, helping pilots visualize not just their current position, but the evolving traffic pattern around them. She prioritized critical information over routine updates, used spatial references that allowed pilots to maintain situational awareness even with degraded instruments, and adapted her communication style to match the needs of each aircraft and situation. As complications were introduced, simulated equipment failures, weather deterioration, communications jamming, Richie remained calm, guiding aircraft through the developing chaos with a confidence that belied her brief introduction to the methodology. Pilots who would normally have been forced to abort missions found alternative approaches, aircraft that would have been diverted found safe corridors through the congestion, and the overall mission effectiveness remained remarkably high. When the simulation ended, 87% of aircraft had successfully completed their assigned missions, a dramatic improvement over the first run. The room erupted in excited conversation, controllers and pilots alike, analyzing what they had just witnessed. "This is," Major Rousseau began, his skepticism now replaced with reluctant admiration, "quite impressive, especially considering Captain Richie had only minutes of training." "That's because AATIN doesn't require learning complex new procedures," Elena explained. "It builds on intuitive spatial understanding that experienced aviation professionals already possess but haven't been trained to utilize effectively. We're not teaching entirely new skills, we're activating latent capabilities and reshaping communication patterns to access them." The demonstration broke the ice, transforming the training that followed from an obligation into an opportunity. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena and her team worked with the NATO controllers and pilots, adapting AATIN protocols to accommodate different national approaches while maintaining the core principles that made the methodology effective. The true test came with the live exercise, conducted in challenging Arctic conditions that pushed both human and machine capabilities to their limits. Aircraft from 6 nations performed complex interception and support missions while contending with temperatures 40 degrees below freezing, rapidly changing weather fronts, and simulated electronic warfare that degraded communications and navigation systems. Elena observed from the main control center as controllers who had been skeptical just weeks before now guided their aircraft with a fluidity and confidence that transformed the exercise from a demonstration of individual national capabilities into a seamless multinational operation. The wing tilt that had once been a secret acknowledgement between Elena and her pilots had spread to NATO aircraft as well, becoming an unofficial symbol of the new approach, a physical manifestation of the trust developing between controllers and pilots across national boundaries. As the exercise concluded, with success rates that exceeded even the simulation results, Elena found herself surrounded by the same controllers who had initially questioned her qualifications. "Major Vasquez," said Captain Richie, her eyes bright with excitement, "what you've taught us, it's not just a different way of controlling aircraft, it's a different way of thinking about three-dimensional space. I've been a controller for 5 years, but I feel like I'm truly seeing the airspace for the first time." "The mathematics of it are fascinating," added Lieutenant Schmidt, a precision-minded German controller. "We've always calculated separation using fixed parameters, but your approach introduces dynamic variables that adapt to conditions. It's both more precise and more flexible simultaneously." Even Major Rousseau, the most vocal initial skeptic, offered his grudging admiration. "It will require significant adjustments to our training programs," he said, "but the results cannot be denied. Your approach saves fuel, increases mission success rates, and most importantly, it will save lives in real combat conditions." As the NATO officials formally requested that AATIN protocols be adopted across the alliance, Elena reflected on the transformative power of expertise freely shared. What had begun as her personal technique developed through years of experience and intuition, had evolved into a methodology that would reshape air traffic control across multiple nations and services. The impact would extend beyond military operations to civilian aviation, space traffic management, and potentially any domain where humans needed to coordinate movement through complex three-dimensional spaces. Later that evening, as the Arctic darkness was illuminated by the dancing colors of the northern lights, Elena stood outside the base with Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, watching the natural phenomenon that had awed humans for millennia. "Pretty spectacular view," Reeves said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Almost as impressive as watching you transform NATO ATC in 2 weeks." Elena smiled, her gaze fixed on the shifting curtains of green and purple light. "It wasn't me. It was the methodology. The approach works because it's aligned with how humans naturally process spatial information. I just recognized something that was already there, waiting to be articulated." "That's what the best innovations do," Reeves replied. "They don't create something from nothing. They reveal what was hidden in plain sight." He paused, watching as a particularly bright wave of aurora rippled across the sky. "You know, when I first heard your voice on comms all those years ago, I couldn't articulate why it was different. I just knew that I trusted it implicitly, that somehow you were seeing the airspace more clearly than anyone I'd ever worked with. And now I understand that you weren't just giving better instructions. You were sharing your vision of the sky, helping me see what you saw, navigate as you would navigate." He turned to face her. "That's the real innovation of AATIN. It's not about procedures or protocols. It's about shared perception. You've taught controllers to share their unique view of the airspace, and pilots to receive and integrate that vision with their own." As they stood in companionable silence, watching nature's light show, Elena reflected on her journey from disgrace to redemption, from isolation to connection. The wing tilt that had begun as a secret acknowledgement between pilots who recognized her voice had evolved into a symbol of a new kind of communication between those who navigated the sky and those who guided them. What had once marked her as an outsider now identified her as a pioneer, a transformation as dramatic as the one from Traveler 203 to Major Vasquez. The northern lights continued their dance above, a reminder that even in the darkest Arctic night, illumination could appear in the most spectacular and unexpected ways. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, implementing AATIN across NATO forces, adapting the methodology for civilian applications, training a new generation of controllers to see the sky as she did. But tonight, standing beneath the aurora's glow, Elena was content in the knowledge that her gift for guiding others through invisible pathways was no longer hidden but shared, no longer suppressed but celebrated, creating safer skies for pilots who would continue to acknowledge her contribution with the subtle but meaningful tilt of their wings. 2 years after the successful NATO implementation of Operation AATIN, Elena found herself standing at the edge of the Kennedy Space Center's massive vehicle assembly building, watching as the sun rose over the Atlantic Ocean. The early morning light painted the horizon in brilliant oranges and pinks, a natural spectacle that rivaled the technological marvel of the spacecraft waiting on the launch pad several miles away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" came a voice beside her, and Elena turned to find Dr. Samantha Chen, NASA's Director of Orbital Operations. "No matter how many launches I witness, that moment when the sun crests the horizon never loses its magic. I imagine it's similar to the feeling pilots describe when breaking through cloud cover into clear blue sky," Elena replied, adjusting her visitor's badge. "A reminder of why we push boundaries in the first place." Dr. Chen nodded, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "Which brings us to why you're here, Colonel Vasquez. Your Operation AATIN has revolutionized military aviation. Now we need that same revolution for space traffic control." The promotion to colonel had come 6 months earlier, recognition not just of Elena's technical innovations, but of her leadership in implementing them across multiple services and nations. What had begun as a specialized military program had expanded into a comprehensive approach to three-dimensional traffic management that was transforming everything from commercial aviation to maritime navigation. Space presents unique challenges, Elena said, turning her attention to the distant launch pad where the Artemis mission spacecraft waited for its journey to lunar orbit. Vastly different scales, orbital mechanics instead of aerodynamics, communication delays that make real-time adjustments impossible for distant operations. Precisely why traditional approaches are failing us, Dr. Chen confirmed. With commercial launches increasing exponentially, orbital debris proliferating, and multiple nations expanding their space presence, our current traffic management systems are reaching their limits. We need the Vasquez approach. Elena smiled at the phrase that had become shorthand for her methodology throughout the aviation community. I'm not sure my techniques will translate directly to orbital operations. The spatial visualization works for atmospheric flight because humans have evolved to understand three-dimensional movement in gravity. Space introduces a fourth dimension of orbital mechanics that our brains aren't naturally equipped to process. That's exactly why we need you, Dr. Chen insisted. Not to apply the same techniques, but to develop new ones based on the same principles. You didn't just create protocols, you fundamentally changed how controllers and pilots share spatial awareness. We need that same transformation for ground controllers and astronauts. As they walked toward the operations and checkout building where NASA's mission control teams were preparing for the day's activities, Elena considered the challenge before her. Space traffic management represented a quantum leap beyond even the most complex aviation scenarios she had tackled. Yet the fundamental problem remained the same, enabling humans to visualize and navigate three-dimensional space with precision and confidence. Inside the building, they were met by Commander Jason Williams, the veteran astronaut who would be leading the Artemis mission to establish the first permanent lunar base. His weathered face broke into a smile as he extended his hand to Elena. "Colonel Vasquez, it's an honor. Your reputation precedes you." "The honor is mine, Commander," Elena replied, shaking his hand. "Your achievements in space exploration have been extraordinary. Not as extraordinary as what we're hoping to accomplish with your help," Williams said, gesturing for them to follow him into a conference room, where a diverse team of mission controllers, astronauts, and engineers waited. "We've gathered everyone involved in space traffic management, from LEO to lunar operations. They're all eager to hear how your approach might transform their work." The briefing that followed was unlike any Elena had conducted before. Instead of explaining established protocols, she found herself exploring possibilities, asking questions about challenges unique to space operations, and encouraging the NASA specialists to articulate their intuitive understanding of orbital mechanics and spacecraft movement. The key insight from AATIN wasn't any specific technique, she explained, standing before a holographic display showing current spacecraft and debris orbiting Earth. It was the recognition that humans have untapped spatial intelligence that traditional protocols either ignore or suppress. We don't need to teach controllers and astronauts to visualize space differently. We need to enable them to express and share the visualizations they already form intuitively. A young mission controller raised her hand. "But space isn't intuitive for most humans. We're evolved for movement in gravity, not orbital mechanics." "Excellent point," Elena acknowledged. "But astronauts and controllers who work with orbital operations develop a different kind of intuition, one based on experience rather than evolution." "Commander Williams, would you say you have an intuitive sense of orbital movement after your missions?" The veteran astronaut nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely. After a while, you start to feel orbital mechanics in your gut. You develop a sense for how objects will move relative to each other, how small adjustments compound over time. It becomes, almost like music. You feel the rhythm and harmony of orbital movement." "Music," Elena repeated, her eyes lighting up with inspiration. "That's a perfect metaphor. Traditional protocols treat space traffic like mathematics, precise but abstract. What if we approached it more like music? Mathematical at its core, but expressed and understood through patterns, rhythms, and harmonies." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For the next 3 months, Elena divided her time between her ongoing responsibilities with Operation AATIN and this new frontier at NASA. Working with a dedicated team of controllers, astronauts, and cognitive scientists, she developed what would eventually be called the Orbital Harmonic Visualization System, a revolutionary approach to space traffic management that translated the complex mathematics of orbital mechanics into visual and auditory patterns that humans could intuitively comprehend. The breakthrough came when they stopped treating spacecraft as isolated objects and began visualizing entire orbital systems as interconnected patterns. Cosmic choreography, where each element influenced and was influenced by every other element. Controllers learned to see potential conjunctions and orbital perturbations not as abstract probability calculations, but as dissonance in an otherwise harmonious system. "It's like you've given us a sixth sense," remarked Dr. Eliza Kim, the lead flight dynamics officer for the Artemis mission, after a particularly successful simulation. "I was tracking 17 objects simultaneously and could feel when something wasn't right, even before the computer alerts registered the problem." The true test came with the launch of Artemis, a mission of unprecedented complexity, involving multiple spacecraft, precise orbital insertions, and navigation through increasingly congested cislunar space. Elena stood in mission control alongside Dr. Chen, watching as controllers using the newly developed protocols guided the mission through its critical phases with a confidence and precision that would have been impossible with traditional approaches. Artemis 1 Houston called the primary controller, her voice calm yet vibrant with focused energy. "We're tracking an orbital harmonic disruption in your projected path. Suggest adjustment of 0.3 degrees in your current trajectory to restore optimal pattern." Houston, Artemis 1, came Commander Williams, voice from 200,000 miles away. "I can visualize the disruption. Implementing 0.3 adjustment now." The holographic display showed the spacecraft's subtle course correction, its projected path shifting to avoid what would have been a dangerously close approach to a piece of debris from an earlier mission. The maneuver was so elegant, so precise, that it almost appeared choreographed, a dancer adjusting their steps to maintain perfect harmony with their partner. "Remarkable," murmured Dr. Chen. "With traditional protocols, that would have required multiple communications, complex vector calculations, and significantly more fuel consumption. They resolved it with a single exchange and minimal adjustment." As the Artemis mission continued successfully toward lunar orbit, Elena found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From disgraced air traffic controller to revolutionary innovator, from hiding her abilities to sharing them with others, from isolation to connection that now extended beyond Earth's atmosphere. The pattern of her life, she realized, mirrored the very principles she taught, apparent setbacks and challenges forming part of a larger, harmonious progression toward a more expanded understanding. One evening, as she worked late in her temporary office at Kennedy Space Center, Elena received an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell, the young pilot whose near disaster 3 years earlier had been part of the cascade of events that led to her return to military service. "Colonel Vasquez," he said, standing at attention in the doorway, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Lieutenant Mitchell," Elena replied with genuine pleasure, gesturing for him to enter. "Not at all. What brings you to NASA?" "I've been selected for the astronaut program, ma'am," he said, a hint of pride breaking through his professional demeanor. "Part of the new joint military-NASA initiative. I start training next month." "Congratulations, that's extraordinary news." Mitchell nodded, then seemed to gather his courage for what he really wanted to say. "The selection board specifically cited my experience with AATIN protocols as a key factor in their decision. They believe pilots trained in your visualization techniques will adapt more readily to space operations." He paused. "I wanted to thank you, again, first for saving my life, and now for this opportunity." Elena felt a surge of emotion, not just pride in this young officer's achievements, but a deeper satisfaction in seeing the ripple effects of her work extending in unexpected directions. "You earned this opportunity through your own abilities, Lieutenant. I just helped create conditions where those abilities could be recognized." After Mitchell left, Elena returned to the window of her office, gazing up at the night sky where stars shimmered with ancient light. Somewhere up there, Commander Williams and his crew were making history, establishing humanity's first permanent presence beyond Earth orbit, guided by protocols that had evolved from her intuitive understanding of three-dimensional space. The following week brought another unexpected development. As Elena prepared to return to her primary duties with Operation AATIN, she was summoned to a meeting with NASA Administrator Jackson and Joint Chiefs Chairman Marshall. Their expressions as she entered the conference room gave nothing away about the purpose of this high-level gathering. "Colonel Vasquez," began Administrator Jackson without preamble, "we have a proposition for you. Based on the extraordinary success of your work with both military aviation and space operations, we're establishing a new joint position, Director of Advanced Spatial Navigation Systems, overseeing the integration of your methodologies across all domains, air, sea, and space. The position would come with promotion to Brigadier General," added General Marshall, "reporting directly to both NASA and the Joint Chiefs. You would be responsible for developing next-generation navigation and traffic management systems for everything from commercial aircraft to deep space missions." Elena sat in momentary silence, absorbing the magnitude of what was being offered. It represented not just recognition of her achievements, but an opportunity to transform how humans navigated through every domain beyond Earth's surface. "This isn't just about traffic management anymore," Administrator Jackson continued. "Your approach to spatial visualization has implications for everything from autonomous vehicle systems to virtual reality environments to urban planning. You've discovered something fundamental about how humans process and share spatial information. We want to help you expand that discovery to its fullest potential." As Elena considered the offer, her mind returned to that moment in the Nevada Control Tower 4 years earlier, when she had made the fateful decision to take over communications during a crisis, guiding a pilot through dangerous conditions using only her voice and her unique ability to visualize three-dimensional space. That single act of courage, breaking protocol to save a life, had set in motion a transformation that was now reshaping humanity's relationship with the spaces they navigated. "I would be honored to accept," she said finally. "On one condition, the program must include a substantial educational component aimed at identifying and nurturing spatial intelligence in young people, particularly those who might not recognize their own potential. Not everyone with this ability follows a traditional path into aviation or space operations." 6 months later, Elena stood on the stage of a large auditorium at the newly established Spatial Navigation Institute in Colorado Springs, addressing the inaugural class of controllers, pilots, astronauts, and educators, who would be the first to receive comprehensive training in what was now officially called the Vasquez methodology. The audience included not just military and NASA personnel, but representatives from commercial airlines, maritime operations, space tourism companies, and educational institutions worldwide. "When I began my career as an air traffic controller," she told them, "I thought my ability to visualize complex three-dimensional spaces was simply a personal aptitude, something that made me good at my job, but not particularly significant beyond that. What I've learned over these past years is that this ability represents something much more profound, a uniquely human capacity to transform abstract spatial information into intuitive understanding that can be shared and acted upon." As she spoke, Elena noticed a group of young people seated in the front row, students from underserved communities who had been identified through a new screening program designed to discover untapped spatial intelligence. Their presence represented the fulfillment of her condition for accepting the director position, ensuring that future generations of spatial thinkers would be recognized and nurtured regardless of their background or circumstances. "The wing tilt that began as a secret acknowledgement between pilots who recognized my voice on comms has evolved into something much more significant," she continued. "It's become a symbol of what happens when we recognize and value each other's unique perspectives, when we create systems that amplify human potential rather than constraining it with rigid protocols, when we view differences not as deviations from standard procedure but as opportunities for innovation." After the address, as Elena met with students and instructors in the Institute's main hall, a familiar figure approached Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, now serving as the military liaison for astronaut training. "Quite a journey from Traveler 203 to Brigadier General Vasquez," he observed with a smile. "Though I have to say, the star on your shoulder seems less significant than the ideas you've put into the world." Elena nodded, watching as one of the young students demonstrated a natural facility with the holographic spatial visualization system, her hands moving with intuitive grace through complex three-dimensional patterns. "The greatest journeys aren't measured in distance or rank," she replied. "They're measured in transformation, not just of circumstances but of understanding." Later that evening, as the Colorado sunset painted the sky in colors reminiscent of that morning at Kennedy Space Center, Elena stood alone on the Institute's observation deck, gazing up at the emerging stars. Somewhere above, astronauts were navigating cislunar space, using protocols that had evolved from her intuition. Around the world, controllers were guiding aircraft, using her visualization techniques. Across oceans, ships were plotting courses based on principles she had articulated. Yet as she reflected on this remarkable journey, Elena realized that her greatest achievement wasn't the protocols or methodologies that bore her name. It was the transformation of her own understanding, from seeing her unique abilities as a personal advantage, to recognizing them as a gift meant to be shared, from fearing judgment to embracing visibility, from hiding in the shadows as Traveler 203 to standing in the light as a pioneer who had changed how humans navigated their world. A movement in the darkening sky caught her attention. The distinctive silhouettes of a formation of stealth aircraft passing overhead, their wings tilting in synchronized acknowledgement as they recognized who stood below. The gesture that had begun as a secret tribute had become an official salute, a symbol of the connection between those who navigated the sky and those who guided them. Elena raised her hand in silent response, acknowledging not just these pilots, but all those whose paths would be smoother, safer, and more harmonious because of what she had discovered, developed, and shared. Her journey had come full circle, from anonymous controller to celebrated innovator, from exile to homecoming, from individual talent to global transformation. As the aircraft disappeared into the distance, their wing tilts a final salute to the woman who had changed how humans moved through three-dimensional space. Elena turned her gaze back to the stars. The universe, with all its complexity and wonder, remained the ultimate frontier for human navigation. Yet thanks to the courage of a controller who had once been just Traveler 203, humanity now had new ways of perceiving, understanding, and traversing not just the skies above Earth, but the vast reaches of space beyond. The wing tilt that had begun as recognition between pilots and a controller had become something much more profound, a symbol of humanity's evolving relationship with the cosmos itself, a gesture of respect for those who helped us find our way through the invisible highways of sky and space, and a reminder that sometimes the most transformative journeys begin with a single brave decision to speak up when others remain silent, to share a unique perspective when convention demands conformity, and to trust that what makes us different might be precisely what makes us invaluable. 10 years had passed since the establishment of the Spatial Navigation Institute, and Brigadier General Elena Vasquez, now in her early 40s, stood at the window of her office at the newly completed International Space Navigation Center in Houston. The sprawling complex represented humanity's commitment to coordinated exploration beyond Earth, housing representatives from 27 nations and serving as the central hub for traffic management throughout cislunar space and beyond. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The view from her window encompassed both the past and future of space exploration. The historic Mission Control Center that had guided the Apollo missions now stood in the shadow of the gleaming new facility, dedicated to coordinating humanity's expanding presence throughout the solar system. Elena's reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed not just by time but by purpose, her once tentative demeanor replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who had found her true calling and followed it beyond all expectations. A gentle chime announced an incoming call, and Elena turned from the window to answer. "General Vasquez," she acknowledged, activating the holographic display that materialized above her desk. "Elena," came the familiar voice of Lieutenant General Michael Reeves, now commanding the Space Force's Interplanetary Operations Division. "I just got word that Artemis 17 has successfully established the quantum communication relay at L4. We now have instantaneous comms coverage throughout cislunar space, no delay." "That's extraordinary news, Michael," Elena replied, watching as the holographic display updated to show the new communication network. A web of quantum-entangled relays that would eliminate the light-speed delays that had complicated space traffic control since its inception. "Have you informed Director Chen?" "She's ecstatic. Says it's the final piece needed for full implementation of harmonic visualization protocols throughout the Earth-Moon system." The technological breakthrough represented the culmination of a decade's work, the marriage of Elena's intuitive spatial navigation methodology with quantum communication technology that allowed controllers and spacecraft to share a unified perception of space in real time, regardless of distance. What had begun as a simple wing tilt between a controller and pilots had evolved into a revolution in how humanity moved through the cosmos. "There's something else," Reeves continued, his expression shifting to one of barely contained excitement. "The Europa mission proposal has been approved. Full funding, international cooperation, Launch date set for 18 months from now. And they want you to lead the navigation design team. Elena felt her breath catch. The Europa mission represented humanity's first serious attempt to explore the ocean moon orbiting Jupiter, a mission with profound implications for the search for extraterrestrial life. The navigational challenges were unprecedented. Coordinating a fleet of spacecraft and submersible probes across a distance where even quantum communication faced limitations, in an environment more alien than anything humans had yet encountered. It's the ultimate test of everything you've developed, Reeves continued. Spatial navigation, not just through vacuum, but eventually through liquid water under kilometers of ice, in an environment where traditional orientation cues are meaningless. If the Vasquez methodology can work there, it can work anywhere in the solar system. As Elena processed this news, her thoughts were interrupted by another notification, a reminder of the ceremony scheduled for that afternoon. Today marked the graduation of the 10th class from the Spatial Navigation Institute's Young Pioneers program, an initiative she had established to identify and nurture exceptional spatial intelligence in children from underserved communities. "I need to go, Michael," she said, gathering her notes for the address she would deliver. "The Young Pioneers' graduation starts in an hour. We'll discuss Europa tomorrow at the planning session." "Of course," Reeves nodded. "Give those kids my regards. Tell them we're saving seats in mission control for every one of them." As Elena made her way through the complex toward the auditorium, she passed walls lined with photographs, documenting the remarkable journey of the past decade. The first successful Mars landing guided by harmonic visualization protocols, the establishment of the permanent lunar settlement at Shackleton Crater, the dramatic rescue of the disabled Odyssey spacecraft that had tested her methodology under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Yet among these historic images were interspersed photographs of younger faces, the graduates of the Young Pioneers program who had gone on to become controllers, pilots, astronauts, and innovators in their own right. These represented Elena's most personal achievement, ensuring that exceptional spatial intelligence would be recognized and nurtured regardless of background, that no future Elena would spend years hiding their gifts for fear of judgment or rejection. The auditorium was filled with excited families watching as 50 young people, ranging in age from 16 to 20, prepared to receive their certifications in advanced spatial navigation. Elena paused at the back, taking in the scene with a sense of fulfillment that transcended professional pride. These young people, selected for their exceptional ability to visualize and navigate three-dimensional space, represented the future of humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Among them was Aria Johnson, a 19-year-old from South Chicago, whose remarkable abilities had been discovered during a routine school screening implemented as part of the Young Pioneers outreach program. Elena had personally mentored Aria for the past 3 years, recognizing in her not just extraordinary spatial intelligence, but the same intuitive understanding of human factors that had made Elena's own approach so revolutionary. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Elena took her place on the stage and the ceremony began, she watched the graduates receive their certifications with a deep sense of continuity. The wing tilt that had once been a secret acknowledgement between herself and stealth pilots had evolved into the official salute of the Spatial Navigation Corps, performed now by these young graduates as they accepted their credentials, a physical embodiment of the connection between those who navigated space and those who guided them. When it came time for her address, Elena approached the podium with the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark. The auditorium fell silent. Generations of spatial navigators united in respect for the woman who had transformed their field from a procedural discipline to an art form that married human intuition with technological precision. 10 years ago, Elena began. When we established the Young Pioneers program, many questioned whether spatial intelligence was something that could be identified early and developed systematically. They suggested that my own abilities were unique, a fortunate accident of genetics or experience that couldn't be replicated or taught. She gestured toward the graduates seated before her. You have proven those doubts unfounded. Each of you possesses a gift that was once considered rare and mysterious, the ability to visualize and navigate complex three-dimensional spaces with intuitive understanding. But more importantly, each of you has learned to share that gift, to communicate your spatial perception in ways that bridge the gap between individual experience and collective action. Elena paused, her gaze moving across the audience to where Aria sat among her fellow graduates, the young woman's expression reflecting the same intensity and purpose that Elena had once directed toward her own challenges. The greatest lesson of the past decade isn't about navigation protocols or communication techniques. It's about the power of shared perception, the understanding that our individual ways of seeing the world, however unique or unconventional, become truly transformative when we learn to share them effectively with others. As Elena continued her address, she couldn't help but reflect on the irony of her journey, how the very ability that had once led to her professional exile had ultimately transformed humanity's relationship with space. The incident that had sent her into hiding as Traveler 203 now seemed like a necessary detour, a path that had forced her to develop a deeper understanding of her own gifts before sharing them with the world. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and graduates exchanged plans for their future assignments, Elena found herself approached by Aria Johnson, whose certification had been accompanied by a special commendation for her groundbreaking work on navigating gravitationally complex environments. "General Vasquez," Aria said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found her calling, "I wanted to thank you before I leave for Lunar Station. Your mentorship has meant everything to me." "You've earned this opportunity through your own exceptional abilities, Aria," Elena replied, echoing the words she had once spoken to Lieutenant Mitchell years earlier. "I just helped create conditions where those abilities could be recognized." "It's more than that," Aria insisted. "You showed me that being different, seeing the world in ways others don't, isn't something to hide or apologize for. It's something to develop and share." The young woman's words struck Elena deeply, articulating the profound transformation in her own relationship with her unique abilities. From concealing her gifts as something that made her an outsider, to celebrating them as contributions that connected her to a larger purpose. This was the true journey she had traveled. "I heard about the Europa mission," Aria continued, her eyes bright with excitement. "Is it true they're implementing the new deep-water navigation protocols I helped design?" Elena nodded, feeling a surge of pride in this brilliant young woman who represented everything the Young Pioneers program was meant to accomplish. "Your work on non-visual spatial orientation in fluid environments was revolutionary, Aria. The submersibles that will explore Europa's ocean will be using navigation systems based directly on your research." As they discussed the technical challenges of the upcoming mission, Elena was struck by how naturally their conversation flowed between mentor and protege, each building on the other's insights, creating a collaborative vision that was richer than either could have developed alone. This, she realized, was perhaps her greatest achievement, not just developing new navigation protocols, but nurturing a community of spatial thinkers who could continue the work beyond her own contributions. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Elena received an unexpected visitor in her office. Dr. Samantha Chen, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, who had first invited Elena to apply her methodology to space operations a decade earlier. "I thought I might find you here," Dr. Chen said, settling into a chair across from Elena's desk. "Still working while everyone else celebrates. Some things never change." Elena smiled, setting aside the preliminary notes she'd been making for the Europa mission. "Just getting a head start on the navigation challenges for Europa. The gravitational interactions alone are going to require entirely new visualization techniques. And you'll solve them, just as you've solved every other challenge that's come your way." Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. "But that's not why I'm here. The International Space Exploration Commission has made a decision I thought you should hear from me directly." Elena waited, noting the unusual formality in her old friend's tone. "The first interstellar probe, the one that will attempt to reach Proxima Centauri, they're naming it Vasquez." The news hit Elena with unexpected emotional force. The Interstellar Initiative represented humanity's first attempt to reach beyond the solar system, a multi-generational project that would take decades to complete, but would forever change humanity's relationship with the cosmos. I don't know what to say," Elena managed, genuinely stunned by this recognition. "You don't need to say anything," Dr. Chen replied gently. "It's fitting that the vessel that will guide humanity to the stars should bear the name of the woman who changed how we navigate space. The Vasquez probe will carry not just scientific instruments, but a philosophy of spatial navigation that you created. The understanding that technology alone isn't enough, that human intuition and perception remain essential, even as we reach beyond our solar system." As Dr. Chen left, Elena remained at her desk, overwhelmed by the symbolic significance of this honor. From an air traffic controller hiding her gifts to having her name carried to the stars, the journey seemed almost incomprehensible in its scope. Her reflection was interrupted by a notification from the Lunar Observatory. A unique phenomenon was occurring that might interest her. Activating the holographic display, Elena watched as a formation of spacecraft returning from Mars to Earth performed a synchronized maneuver as they passed the lunar station, each vessel banking slightly in the distinctive wing tilt that had begun with stealth fighters recognizing her voice a decade earlier. The gesture, now performed by spacecraft designed never to enter atmosphere, had transcended its original context to become a universal symbol of respect between those who navigated the cosmos and those who guided them. What had started as a secret acknowledgement between pilots and a controller in hiding had evolved into a tradition that spanned Earth orbit to the outer planets. 5 years later, Elena stood on the observation deck of the Europa Mission Control Center, watching through the massive windows as the massive spacecraft designated for humanity's most ambitious exploration mission underwent final preparations on the launch pad. The distinctive wing-like solar arrays that would power its journey to Jupiter's mysterious moon gleamed in the morning sun, a visual echo of the wing tilt that had become so central to Elena's professional journey. At 65, Elena had transitioned from active leadership to an advisory role, guiding the next generation of spatial navigation specialists while providing her unique perspective to missions that pushed the boundaries of human exploration. The Europa mission represented perhaps the most challenging implementation of her methodology yet, navigating not just through space, but eventually through an alien ocean beneath kilometers of ice, searching for signs of life in an environment unlike anything humans had evolved to comprehend. General Vasquez came a voice behind her, and Elena turned to find Aria Johnson, now 34, and serving as Chief Navigation Officer for the Europa mission. The final simulation results just came in. The deep water protocols performed flawlessly, even with the introduced communication delays and environmental anomalies. Elena nodded, studying the data on the tablet Aria handed her. Impressive. Your refinements to the fluid dynamics visualization model made all the difference. I had an excellent foundation to build upon, Aria replied with a smile that acknowledged their shared understanding of spatial navigation. The core Vasquez methodology provided the framework. I just adapted it for underwater applications. As they discussed the final preparations for the mission, Elena was struck by how completely Aria and her team had internalized and extended the principles she had first articulated more than 15 years earlier. What had begun as Elena's personal technique for visualizing airspace had evolved into a comprehensive philosophy of spatial navigation that spanned environments from Earth's atmosphere to interplanetary space to alien oceans. Later that day, as the launch window approached, Elena joined the assembled dignitaries in the VIP observation area. Among them were faces that spanned her remarkable journey. Lieutenant General Reeves, now approaching retirement, Captain Mitchell, who had become one of the most accomplished astronauts of his generation, Dr. Chen, still sharp despite her advanced age, and dozens of graduates from the Young Pioneers program who now occupied leadership positions throughout the international space community. As the countdown proceeded, Elena found herself reflecting on the meaning of legacy. The wing tilt that had begun as a secret acknowledgement between pilots who recognized her voice on comms had evolved into something far more significant. A symbol of the connection between those who navigated and those who guided, a physical expression of the shared perception that made complex exploration possible. But more important than any symbol or protocol or methodology was the community of spatial thinkers that had flourished under her guidance. Individuals who might otherwise have hidden their unique perceptual abilities now celebrated for their contributions to humanity's greatest adventure. The massive engines ignited, and the Europa spacecraft rose from Earth on a column of flame beginning its long journey to Jupiter's mysterious moon. As it cleared the tower, Mission Control erupted in cheers and applause, celebrating the culmination of years of preparation and the beginning of a journey that would answer fundamental questions about life beyond Earth. In that moment, watching the spacecraft ascend toward the stars, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. From Traveler 203, hiding her gifts in a regional airport, to General Vasquez, whose name would travel to the stars aboard humanity's first interstellar probe. The journey had been defined not by titles or recognition, but by the courage to share a unique perspective when convention demanded conformity. As the spacecraft disappeared into the blue, Elena thought of all the young spatial thinkers whose gifts were now being recognized and nurtured, rather than suppressed or ignored. She thought of the controllers and pilots and astronauts who had learned to share their perception of three-dimensional space in ways that transcended traditional communication. She thought of the missions yet to come, exploring worlds she would never see but would help humanity navigate through the methodologies she had pioneered. And in that reflection, she understood that the true meaning of her journey wasn't found in protocols or programs or even in the spacecraft that would bear her name to distant stars. It was found in the transformation of how humans perceived and navigated the universe around them, a transformation that had begun with a single act of courage, speaking up when protocols demanded silence, trusting that what made her different might be precisely what made her invaluable. As Elena left the observation deck, she passed a group of young trainees from the newest class of the Spatial Navigation Institute. Seeing her, they spontaneously performed the wing tilt salute, not as a military formality, but as a genuine acknowledgement of the woman whose courage had created opportunities for them to embrace their own unique gifts. Elena returned the salute, recognizing in their eager faces the future of spatial navigation, a future where unique perspectives would be valued rather than suppressed, where difference would be recognized as potential rather than deviation, where the boundaries of human exploration would be limited only by imagination and courage. From anonymous controller to pioneer whose name would travel to the stars, Elena Vasquez had completed a journey as vast as the cosmos she had helped humanity navigate. Yet as she watched the next generation prepare to extend that journey beyond anything she had imagined, she understood that endings were simply new beginnings viewed from a different perspective, that her legacy would continue to evolve through all those who learned to see space through the lens she had created, guiding humanity's journey to the stars with the shared perception that had begun with a simple wing tilt, acknowledging a voice that should have been heard all along. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.